As Catholics around the world mourn the death of Pope Francis, the Vatican is preparing for what comes next. Joining us now is Chancellor Marcelo Suarez-Orozco from University of Massachusetts, Boston, rather. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
So good to be with you.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know this kind of sets in motion a whole series of events that need to now take place in terms of rituals. There will now be 9 days of official mourning. Can you talk about some of the traditions observed during these days and what happens specifically today?
Well, first, of course, it's a day of profound sadness to the really billion plus Catholics. But I should also note that Francis was a pioneer in interfaith dialogue. So I'm sure that folk of good faith, of all faiths around the world, are in great, great sadness today for what he represented. So now we enter the Novendiales. These are the 9 days of mourning, which will include daily prayers at the Vatican, the Requiem Masses, and then, of course, Francis, he will be buried not in St. Peter's. He will be buried at the Santa Maria Maggiore, outside of the Vatican walls, a church that he visited over 100 times during his reign in the throne of St. Peter's. And in between 16 and 21 days, then we will begin the process of the conclave, the choosing of the new Pope. So today is a day of sadness, dolor y alegría is how he would like to be remembered, I think. Dolor, because we've lost such an important voice at this moment where the world is facing such enormous challenges. And alegría, joy, because he was a loving Pope. He was a Pope with a wicked sense of humor. I had the enormous pleasure of introducing to him governors from around the world. Recently, just last May, I introduced him to Gavin Newsom, to Maura Healey, to Kathy Hochul from our country, but also from governors and mayors from around the world. And his wicked sense of humor, just his playfulness, was so characteristic. He had joy, he had beauty, he had an enormous sense of justice. He was a Pope for our times, and he will be deeply, deeply missed by folk of good faith from around the world.
Yeah, and Chancellor, speaking of that, we see the throngs of people who are mourning him this morning. For those who don't know, can you explain how do Catholics around the world typically participate in mourning a Pope? And we're talking about people from local parishes to major cathedrals.
Folk will gather at churches, places of worship, to remember him, both in formal and informal ways, with prayer, with their own rituals, with the ritual sanctioned by the church, but also with the private remembrances of a Pope that in his humility, in his beauty, in his kindness, touched so many of us, both through his own lived experiences, his teachings, and again, the beauty with which he connected with people in his travels. He was always on the move, He was the Pope Mobile was always on standby, and his humility, his common touch. He was the Pope of the people. He came from very humble origins. His family was working class, Italian. They had to leave the fascists in Italy, went to Argentina. He did all kinds of jobs in Argentina. He studied sciences. He went to what we would call in our country community college, studied chemistry. He was very fascinated by science. His connection with common people, I think, is what was most notable. Looking back, we gathered in a summit at the Apostolic Palace last May, and he was so, there was so much joy when I introduced him to children, the children from the UCLA lab school. I was a dean at UCLA for 10 years. We brought children to talk about building climate resilience to protect us all. And meeting the children, meeting the indigenous leaders. We brought leaders from the Amazon. We brought leaders from the Mato Grosso. Spoke about nature. You could see the old Pope and the old indigenous leaders in each other's eyes, a kind of a mutual communion about the need to build resilience, to protect us, to protect our home, to protect the most vulnerable people. So I think that people of faith, people of all faiths today, will be remembering Francis in multiple ways, private and public, in religious ways, and in their own personal, humane ways, because he was such a humane force in these troubled times.
And a true leader, really, across the world. I remember I was fortunate enough to cover his visit, a historic visit to the UN in 2015, and he did, as you said, just touch so many people. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Really appreciate you being with us to share your memories.
My pleasure.